a short story called Howling at the Full Moon in San Francisco. I go biking to the Tenderloin neighborhood, thinking all the way about that Taurus moon which will be full tonight, sitting atop San Francisco and hanging heavy on my heart, and how every year that same moon marks some major downfall of the spirit, usually in the form of everything falling to pieces, and I'm getting very curious to see how it all turns out this year. Half knowing it's probably not going to be easy, and the other half wondering if it will have something to do with my father who's going to surgery in a few weeks, or my grandmother who my mom just told me this morning is in the hospital again. Thinking about Joe who had to fly home for his grandfather who just passed away a few days ago, and how I had semi plans to meet the muse out here. But she told me yesterday how she had to delay her flight because of her funeral too. There's no time to be all concerned about with all this death in the air, because I'm so busy being out of my mind with happiness as I cross the Golden Gate Bridge again and roll up and down those historic hills following signs for Civic Center, thinking visions of how beat this area is going to get the closer I get to the center. Skid Row is worse off than I expected, but just as beautiful, with burnt-out hippies nodding off on stoops and in alleyways beside the entrances to grand courthouses and police stations, and everyone walking around is feeling extra aggressive, yelling profanities and at one another, and none of them stopping to take a look, like I do, at the massive murals of psychedelic color that have taken over the decaying walls of these downtown avenues all week. Friends and even my uncle have told me to avoid Tenderloin, which only made me more curious, because from all my travels, I've always had the same experience, that art follows poverty. And I think, well, if it's so tough here with dealers and pushers walking the streets, stepping over their customers, who some may have OD'd and others are just rousing from another opiate dream, then it's probably the only place in San Francisco where an artist can still afford to live. Most of the murals speak in an illustrated vernacular, from cartoons of the 90s, and I moved from one block to another enjoying the color, but not getting too attached until then I came upon a giant Buddhist shrine painted upon the front exterior of an abandoned and dilapidated row home that resembles the gates of Nirvana if there ever was one. And at the front door, a bum is sleeping all tucked in nice and cozy with his garbage bags wrapped around his lap and a 40 rolling out from his outstretched hand, but not breaking. And I have to wonder if this is Siddhartha, going through his trials to become enlightened. Only in the modern era, we pay no mind to those having a harder time. And it's truly impossible for a monk to beg for change like they did 1,000 or more years ago and be received kindly. I find pennies and a quarter at the beggar's feet, possibly discarded or maybe forgotten. But instead of picking them up like I normally would, I leave them and some other change I found in the neighborhood on the sidewalk next to him for when he wakes, because we are both vagabonds in our current state, and bums must start helping other bums for this world to ever change. I call Antonio, and believe it or not, he had the same idea to check out this neighborhood, and he's only a few blocks away. So we meet and bike around a little more, inspecting the painted walls and minding the characters before getting antsy and deciding to leave. We start riding north and bike up to Union Square and do a double take, because all those tramps and hippies on hard times have been replaced by classy gentlemen wearing top hats and their sleeper window shopper daughters strolling arm in arm about the streets underneath the light of a 100-foot Christmas tree. I look back where we came from and it's still there, that black hole of utter chaos and neglect with smashed windows and cars on fire and an impoverished populace still lying on the sidewalks, and yet right next to it is all this extreme wealth of the world with gold emblazoned lettering saying, "No loitering," just in case you were curious. This makes me sad to see such commercial waste fed to these clueless sheep all wandering about me, who probably don't give two shits about the people dying 2 blocks away. And all this traffic here in front of us and behind us is honking and giving me the impression that these people haven't seen bicyclists before. And then it dawns on me that maybe all these people are actually the part of the bridge and tunnel tourism route that is the death of any good city that really needs some helpful regrowth. We decide to get the hell out of there, and Antonio leads the way, riding his bike straight up Knob Hill, which goes for 3 or 4 blocks before we reach a plateau, and then several more blocks before we reach the actual top. And from there, we are looking down on all the rest of the city. And it's dark now, so all the lights are twinkling up at us. And over towards the bay, there's this great big light shining behind this skyscraper, and I yell over to Antonio, who's still making his way up the last part of the hill, huffing and puffing, but not cursing his fixed gear, and instead seemingly enjoying the patience it requires. "Hey man, I think the moon is coming out." And sure enough, from behind this sole skyscraper, spire of apartment building, with the Oakland Bridge as its background, out pops the moon, big and catastrophic. looking practically golden, maybe the biggest yet I've ever seen in this life, and she is drawing all of us closer to get a better sight line. So we go over to the edge of the hill and step up to the corner, where already there is a woman standing there with her phone held in front of her, snapping a couple of photos, and then standing there absorbed in the moon's luminescence, taking up her entire screen. And she is somewhat surprised when we walk up right next to her to do the same thing, as if she lost track of where she was for a minute and forgot she wasn't alone in this city. We pull out our phones and take pictures too, leaving our bikes leaned against a nearby building, and as we do this, the whole corner begins to fill up with all these other people stopping and even pulling their cars over to get out and stand there looking at that glorious muse of muses glowing above their city. They're all scrambling to get their smartphones out, to get a picture of her, to share with each other later, but there is no later, because as I look around, everyone is joining us, but no one is leaving. And everyone has their hands up in the air, stuck in that pose, pausing to focus their phone's camera, hoping to capture the moon's luminosity. I look around me, and everyone is so gestural, their hands held high, and together aligning their chakras, focusing all their sights on the moon's light, and I think to myself, is this the new moon salutation of the future? Is this a new lunar dance? Is this the new form of howling at the moon? And then it grips me, and I don't have time to answer, because all of a sudden I feel it come up like this grunt-like bark coming from deep down in the stomach and just above the groin, and straightening up my spine as it ups through my throat and out my now open mouth as a howl! So loud, and at the top of my lungs.
Yeah!
I suddenly become aware that I've shocked everyone out of their trance, and they're all looking at me oddly. A grown man suddenly possessed by the wild, and howling up at his mother moon with such desire. I can't stop myself though, even when everyone's looking at me and me feeling more than a little bit embarrassed, but then I hear Antonio's voice, somewhere in the crowd of 100 or more that has taken resonance up on top of this hill, and he's joined me, and he's howling too. And then sure enough, one by one, every single other person goes through the same motions of casting away their self-consciousness, and they all begin barking and almost laughing until they are standing there, all these hundreds and hundreds of complete strangers, transfixed by that glorious wonder above, and they're all howling with all their fury and might, like a pack of wolves, calling out the only known name of this great goddess, and shouting her name so loudly now that even the neighbors who come out on their balconies to yell at us to quiet down can't help but join in. It seems to go on forever, and the moon continues to rise above the bay into the nighttime sky, welcoming our primal chant from the city, and even blushing to herself, but never telling us what utter destruction she has in store for us, and how only a few days from now, sleeping under her embrace, things are really going to hit the shitter, and we're all going to be questioning what the hell happened. But right now, it's a pretty moment, and we all get lost in it, totally falling for her, in love with our conqueror. Thanks.
Yeah.